Welcome to the Open Book Tour. This is, I'm Kristin Tollefsen. I'm the Education Director here at the museum. And as I mentioned, this was one that wasn't scheduled, so I volunteered to step in and I invited Veenstra to join me, and really casual conversation, just introducing the new exhibit, which is the Form and Content exhibit. And so what I suggested we do is bring a couple of examples, and we've taken things out of the cases, but what I'm offering today is if there are particular pieces that you'd like to see that aren't too challenging to disassemble and bring out, we can do that as well. So I thought we'd start off by just having a little bit of a presentation and then continue on into conversation. So a little bit about my background. I'm not a bookbinder. I'm a book lover, and I've worked in every library of every school I've attended, so including undergraduate and graduate school. I used to work as a page at the Bainbridge Island Library, and have grown up in a household where books were really at a premium, and reading and writing and being creative. So the format of the visual book is something that's always been really appealing to me, especially since I think in my own artwork, I think about narrative and storytelling and memory, and so a lot of those things, I feel a very big symbiosis with all the work in here, and my office is right across the hall, so. So I just wanted to show you a couple of quick resources that are available for you to look at. I won't be sharing these as books to pass around, but you're welcome to look at these books. This classic by Keith Smith, The Structure of the Visual Book, is something that I bought for myself when I was in grad school, and I attended graduate school for metalsmithing, so it wasn't really a direct connection. But this idea that books can be sculptural, moved through human scale, different formats that really invite you to have a dynamic experience, was something that really has influenced my sculptural work ever since. So I highly recommend this. It also has some good, if you're keen on making books, it has some good instructions in there.
Yeah, I would just add that he has 3 other books.
I have one of them in my office.
All
yeah.
have excellent illustrations on how to do all different kinds of bindings, so they're a great resource.
Yeah. Yeah, the how-to combined with the photo, so how-to, very clear, and also the gallery section shows some interesting books up front. And I would say one of the things that I find interesting also about books is that they're both a vehicle and a form, so that pertains to what we're talking about today. Mm-hmm. We have a field trip program that we started last year, and we were focusing on second graders from the North Kitsap School District and bringing them in sometimes for the first time to an art museum. And we would start by having a session of visual thinking strategies with them, where we would have them look at and talk about what they were seeing in artwork, just as they were doing the talking, rather than having somebody speak to them about what the authority was. And then we would have them fold one of those single-page books where you cut a slit in the center and you do a series of hamburger and hot dog folds, and you end up with a little reversible book. And then they walk around the gallery and use that as their sketchbook to record words or images that come to mind for them while they're here in the gallery. So this idea of the book really influences a lot of what we think about here as well. This is a book that it hardly needs any explanation. This is actually art made from books, so these are books transformed into different forms of artwork. And I think it was the cover that sold me on this, but I also love that it's Coptic bound in kind of a mechanical way, so that it's, but these are books that have been transformed into, I think there is jewelry in there, sculptural works, just it's a huge source of eye candy for anybody interested in this kind of work. This book I purchased last year in New York at the New Museum, and it's another step-by-step book. It's a very plainly illustrated book showing steps and also examples of different formats. So I like those books that are instructional as well as graphic. This book I'm sure you've seen, the 1000 Artists books. We have a lot of artists from the region who are featured in here, and these kind of compilation books are really fun to flip through because of the variety. And I don't know, Peggy, do you have work in this one? Not yet? Next edition? Okay. And then finally, when I was going through my shelf, I found this, which is not really an artist's book, but it was something that I bought for myself years ago. It's a show catalog, and I love the way it's bound with these kind of brads and this craft paper, printed on craft paper cover, and I think that's partly what attracted me to it, was the real kind of essence of just very direct application. But there are some lovely examples in here also of different artist books from this show. So this is a little addition. So the crux of what I wanted to talk about is really this idea that a book and the meaning or the content of the book can support each other. And so Carolina and I have each selected some works from the from personal collection and from what's in the cases right now, and we'll talk a little bit about both of those things. Okay?
All right.
So first of all, I wanted to show you a couple of pieces that have been given to the education department by Cynthia. They are examples of works that are in her collection. They're duplicates, so they're teaching pieces. So if you ever have a group that you'd like to have, that when there are things that are not on display here, or if you'd like me to bring things out to you, in addition to the times when Amy is here doing the hi. I'm happy to, you're welcome to come to the office and use any of the resources that we have while you're here. So there were 3 of these in particular that I thought were great examples. One is this piece, If It Were Up to Me, which is featured right here in the case. It's a piece by Peter and Donna Thomas. And this one's a little bit hard to demonstrate with showing it and with 2 hands, because it is a tiny little scroll book, and you really need to operate both of the brass knobs at the same time to get the scroll to work. But it is a book that starts and can be read by rotating both of the little knobs at the same time. And what I love about this, that's unique, I think, in the whole, it's a unique form to many of these, is that you have to be very patient. There's a very singular way of reading this. It doesn't read well in reverse, so you have to read it slowly and patiently from the start to the finish. And so I will be passing this around. But that's a thing I think that's unique to many of these pieces, because a lot of them have some fluidity about how they can be read or how they're approached, but this is very directed. And so I think when you think about form and you think about the artist's intention for the viewer, that the content comes out in that way also. So here's this little one. One kind of on the other end of the spectrum is this piece by Katherine Michaelis, which is printed on a small, it's a matchbook. And she's actually, it's a painstaking letterpress process that she's used with this. She's taken all the matches out and letterpress printed on each cardboard match a portion of a story. And if you're familiar with the exquisite corpse form of writing, where you have different segments that are randomly attached to one another, this story, once you tear out a match, changes. And so it's like one of those flip books where you have the head and the body that are dissimilar. So do take a peek underneath and see. I haven't had the nerve to tear these out, but I know that she has some that she's actually used. So, and there's information printed on the cover about the artist, and I think that I actually gave you the one that was a little bit more PG. There's one that's a little, she's got some kind of wild stories in there. So I always have to remind myself when I show that to students. But I think this is another, the form and the content, this kind of quick release story, this kind of stories that are disseminated into the air, I think is a lovely, lovely notion. So I'll just keep rotating, sending them in the same direction unless, yeah. This is the last one of these three. This little piece called Word House is very deceptively simple because once you open it up, there's a little laced book inside that again has been printed on all sides, but this folds out to become a little house that gets set up in the, that can stand. And it's printed on both sides, so it's another one of those things that can be read from different angles and in different sequences. And so the theme of the writing is all about houses, and it turns into its own little house. We'll send that.
Who's the artist on that?
That is, oh, I knew you were going to ask that. It's a collaboration. Lisa Leslie Briscoe, Diane Dombacher, Rachel Harris, and Bonnie Thompson Norman at the Window Pane Press in Seattle.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And it has little instructions on the inside. It has information about the artists on the bottom of the box.
You really don't need to turn one. It's just a little tricky to get it started.
Oh, does it work with one?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Just getting it started is
There you go. And Carolina was remarking on this, that the format of the book house is, it's really simple, but this idea that we see something simple that's the fruit of lots of trial and error, and I mean, that's, I think, we were just having a conversation about the artist's process and teaching, and how it's hard to teach process. It's easy to teach technical process, but it's really hard to illuminate the artist's process, and it's hard to activate that in public. It's a very private thing that happens, but that's the thing that people most want to know. It's the magic that people most want to know about. So actually, I will jump to this. That's probably a good segue to showing my own piece that I did. Like I said, I am not a book artist. This was, and the case is many years old. It was made absolutely as a provisional measure for protecting this, but it's not well crafted. It's just a Carolina, who's been teaching our staff how to make acid-free book boxes for Cynthia's collection. So
well,
you
it's
could
just protection.
Yeah.
I mean, it's protection is the main thing. Sometimes people get carried away on protection, and it becomes part of the work.
Precious, yeah. Well, this is not a terribly precious piece, but again, I think unfortunately you're just seeing a portion of this piece. The book is a remnant of a larger installation that I did when I lived in Iceland, and this was installed on the wall. You can see on the back there's still some residue from the poster tack that I used, and it was installed with a map that showed, that marked each of the sites where these images were taken from. And the book itself chronicles a walk that I took almost every day that I lived in this artist residency, which was at an old pig and chicken farm on the way to Reykjavik. And so the first frame is me at the farmhouse where my studio was and where my residence was, and the walk takes place. You'll see that the walk actually takes place over seasons. They kind of flip back and forth between seasons, the wet season and the snowy season, but sequentially starts at the house and ends at the ocean. And so you're welcome to, it is designed to be stretched out, but you can also flip through it individually. So the way this was made was each time I would go out, I would take a little set of cards that were oversized, but that had a rectangle marked out on them, and I would sketch on my walk and come back to the studio, and while it was fresh in my mind, I would do the color work. And I just gathered these over the course of my time. I still find them in my in boxes, little cards. So they were just, that was the practice that I developed for myself to kind of, it was such a big experience during that time that I needed something to really focus and make myself feel at home. So
How long did you stay?
I lived there for a year.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I've been back a number of times after
And
that.
when you were doing this,
Yeah.
my guess, and I wonder if this is true, is when you went back and painted, what you forgot, maybe in terms of color or exact edges or something, became as important to the painting as what you remembered.
Yeah. I think
'cause
that's-
I mean, that adds you into the painting.
And what is interesting also is that I see how at that time I was so tight with everything. Everything was very, yeah. So everything has a very kind of finished look to it. It didn't feel very free or open, but that's more information than you need, really.
No, it's information. Yeah, almost everything.
These last two pieces are projects that were done by a friend of mine who's a graphic designer in Seattle. And a tradition that I understand now from the graphic design field is that typically at the holidays, but other significant times, graphic designers will run a small production of a particular project. It's kind of like editorial photography or a small run of a book or something like that. So my ex-husband and I were the lucky recipients of two of these, and I just love the way she did them. They are, in essence, little artist books, but they're also little chronicles of information and reflections on graphic design. The first piece of this is a series of artist stamps, which were really popular for a long time. And I was just saying to Caroline, I think I have that Donald Evans book on the art stamps, if anybody's interested. I think it's in my office, if you want to check that out. He was an artist whose medium was drawing and painting little runs of fictitious country stamps, and they're just absolutely beautiful, almost related to artist books because they take a certain theme, like a country, or, I mean, you've seen runs of stamps that are theme-based, but they're different. And so that's a little reference here. And this little book, it's okay, come on in. This little book talks about the process of writing and pie and making. It's called The Perfect Piece of Pie, but it's this lovely little artist book that actually folds out into a full-length accordion and tucks back into itself. So send that around with its parts. And the other, okay, yeah. The other one that arrived, and I love, I'm not sure how many things get sent in the mail that are off-sized anymore, but I grew up in the era of mail art, and I was a really good letter writer. I had pen pals in Australia and Burma at different times, and I would just live, and then I had a boyfriend in France for a while, which is another thing. And I just lived for the mail. So I love that this has a little place for postage and the address, and it's very unconventional. And it comes in this little muslin bag, and on the front it says "Planting a New Year," and there's a little seed packet, and I love the first page. We can all stand to learn from that, right?
Yes.
I'm sure we've all got a lot of compost. But it's actually got a little guide. It's a little book that you can keep track of for your garden. So I love that there's this kind of, there's a kind of thoughtfulness that goes into all of those things together. I'm just going to open this up, Carolina, and then
Why
we'll...
don't I do it? Why don't I
Okay.
just do those three?
Okay, so Carolina picked 3 out of the collection today, but again, I know there are some that I was thinking would be really fun to take out, so as we go along, we
And
can
maybe
do...
somebody else has one
Yeah.
that they want to take out too.
Yeah.
Right, okay, I'm just gonna move these over here.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that's really interesting about artist books is that, you know, everybody's drawn to something different, you know, and there's just something in every book for everybody, or maybe not, you know. And I just picked the ones that spoke to me. I mean, a lot of these speak to me, and just too many pieces to pull out, but I just, one of the things I thought about when you were talking about one of your books, you mentioned time. And the thing about making books, so I'm a bookbinder, and mainly I do book restoration. I repair books. And the thing about making books is that it takes a lot of time. Like, it's just a process that is slow. And I was thinking about that earlier when we were talking about a workshop, because you know, you can't really cover a lot in a half-day workshop or even a whole-day workshop, especially if you're trying to pass on skills. But this little book, this is Mayor Blocker's The Ladies Recipe Bee, and it's a group book, kind of like the one up here. This is, forget this, I think this one is called Deck of Cards, or forget the title of this piece, but it comes in a box.
I don't.
And it's a deck of cards where different printers did the individual cards. And then, so this one is recipes, and
Do you want me to hold that up?
oh,
Here.
just sure.
To show it.
Here, let me just, I won't remember which ones she had down, but.
Yeah, that double salad was up,
Okay.
but I love that.
So, I really like practical things. And I'm one of the cards in here, but I actually use this all the time. And in fact, my favorite card, let's see if I can look.
And what does it say on the front? It's the ladies.
The Ladies Recipe Bee. So this
So
is
it's engraved on the front.
Yeah. Maybe I won't be able to find it. Let's see. So it's divided into different potations, stuffings and dressings, exotics, fruits and vegetables.
So they're actually recipes?
Some of them are actually recipes, and some of them are not. I was hoping to find the recipe for friendship, but I can only find the recipe for war, so I'll just read that. Misunderstanding, prejudice and ignorance, history of conflict, lack of compromise, hostility, tears, loss, outrage, stubbornness and inability to forgive. Stir all ingredients together and simmer daily until the stew boils over. She has a same person. This is Bonnie Thompson Norman, Window Pane Press, and she has another one called Recipe for Friendship, which I've been, with her permission, giving to all the couples that get married. Anyway, each greens. Anyway, this is just, there's a lot of different artists working here, and I just enjoy having this in my kitchen, and I look at it regularly.
You know what I think is interesting about that? It just dawned on me that one connection between the metals tradition and the bookmaking tradition is that collaborative spirit, because there's a long-standing tradition in metalsmithing to create a bead or an ornament to share or chain together into a collective piece. So that may be part of the reason that I find an affinity with that kind of.
And I'm really drawn to collaboration. I mean, I think more than half of my art books are collaborations, and I enjoy that process. Yeah. And the other thing about time is that it takes time to look at artists' books. And I know that some of the books in here, actually this show, it seems like there's somewhat fewer things. A lot of times I come in here and there's just so many things to look at. I really like having the ability, the time to carefully look at things. And I mean, I think that's true with any art museum.
Yeah.
But especially in a room where there's so much that you can spend time reading and looking at from different views. So it takes time to make books, and it takes time to be with books. And time, it's like that's all we have. And not a lot of it, right? And yet at the same time, a lot of it. So, and one of the things I love about the process of making books is just getting lost in time and in the making of the book. I appreciate that. So this book here is called not Morton Salt, but Mortal Salt. And I admire conceptual artists, because that's a hard place for me to go. And I love words. And this is the story of Lot and his wife. And I'll just pass that around. The piece speaks for itself. And in this book here, this is called Fortune Teller. And we had a funny exchange just before we started about this, because I said, oh, yeah, one of the reasons I'm drawn to this book is because I love making cootie catchers. That's what we called them when I was growing up, but Kristin
We call
said
them
they called
fortune tellers.
Yeah. And I haven't actually had a chance to sit down and look carefully at this book, but this book is, it's really powerful. Yeah, it's very powerful. And it's I don't remember the artist's name, so I think I'm going to look that up so I can
I think it's right here.
give the full credit.
It's Malini Gupta.
She is Indian, she's from India. And there's two parts to the book, and one is the cootie catcher, which when you open it up, it has different statements about Indian culture. You may die because you're a girl. You may be violated because you're a girl. You will inherit because you're a boy. You are entitled because you're a boy. So, I mean, the colors of this are very soft and gentle, but the story behind it is really powerful. And in this part of the book, she talks about, it's interesting, it starts with fairly large type. My grandmother cried when I was born. And it's all about, you know, what it's like being a girl in this Indian family. And anyway, rather than tell the story, I'll let you look at it. But I was just, I was really struck by the combination of these soft colors, pastel colors, and I love the, what's the name of this?
Ganesh.
Ganesh, this Indian god, and the powerful story underlying it. And this is a really good example of the kind of book that you just can't, you know, without having time to sit down and read it and look at it, it's just another pretty thing in the case. Want to put the lid on that?
I think we can set it in here and
Yes.
pass it around.
Good idea.
Can I say something about this? Because the
Absolutely.
last time I saw it, I bought myself a copy.
Absolutely.
I just try to keep it out of the kitchen. But if you read the poem, if you don't realize it, the poem goes all the way across. You have to just keep reading and following it. It's not just little separate sections. And I just absolutely love this.
That's another,
powerful
Karen Finneyfrock is a Seattle poet who, if you ever have a chance to hear her perform or read her work, she's amazing.
Oh, just based
Yeah.
on that, I would go anywhere to hear her.
Yeah, she's great.
Well, and going back to time, I also appreciate artist books that unfold in time. Like sculpture turned to performance. And there's several artists out there that are doing that kind of work.
So this is a format that you use, Peggy, isn't it? The book that opens up flat. And I think for me, this is really a powerful way to contain your work as well as the sculptural aspect of it contained in a deceptively simple format. Something you were just saying, about the time. Part of the reason for doing these open book tours and for having Amy Goldthwait here on the days when, just to have the access, is that, we all know that these are lovely static displays, but they nowhere near come close to showing the true spirit of the book, which needs to be activated. So. I feel really lucky that we're able to do this also.
It's quite thrilling actually to have come to one of these and see the book and then to see it there, and it's almost like a friendship or
A relationship.
A relationship, truly.
So is there anything anyone's dying to have come out of the cases?
Yeah.
Ooh, this circus one looks amazing. I don't know if that's what it is.
Did everybody read the story in the scroll book?
Yeah.
Very powerful.
Yeah, wasn't it?
Wow.
Yeah.
Sometimes there is the one direction.
This one.
Just that one here.
Because you have to allow it.
Right. It was a little tight.
It was.
Yeah.
By the way, beware of the bridge today.
Yeah, even on Saturday.
So this is how it arrives, like in its case, and it's Mayor Blocker, who is another Seattle-based printmaker and artist, and what did it say? Carousel.
It says Sunken Carousel. It's the
Hell's
title on the
Carousel?
front page.
Hell's Carousel, the merry-go-round of bad behavior. So what's great is that it flips open and it is a complicated pop-up style book that hooks onto itself and creates a carousel format. So I'm going to pass it around.
Actually, this is called the piano hinge binding because it's got this piece here that comes out and would see, now I gotta get it all back together, but I've made a couple of these. They're fun to make. There we go.
So those
So
are
this holds the accordions that make.
Oh, that's just gorgeous.
And is it the fact that it's on a dowel on the center that allows it to open
I think
360 degrees, or?
It would open 360 degrees anyway, but it holds it together in the middle.
Mhm.
Otherwise, this accordion would spread.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's clever the way those pages pop out
And hold each
Mhm.
other open.
and so you see the first
Yeah.
level and then back into it.
Yeah.
So that, I think that, again, getting back to the form and the content, engineering something that tells the story both visually and that tells the story visually, or that stands alone visually, I think is one of the things that I love about artist books too. I know, having taught freshmen at Cornish, one of the things that we really had to get over so many of the times when they would do their first critique is that they wanted to stand with their item and explain everything. They wanted to tell you the whole story about the thing. And I said, we're going to be moving toward you letting go of your object and your object standing on its own and telling the story on its own. And so we're, in a way, we're really lucky to have these fabulous objects that are doing a great job of standing on their own.
Well, because then there's always the story that the artist tells, but the viewer brings their own story,
Mm-hmm.
or their own connection to the story. They're in their own relationship to the story.
Mhm.
So it's kind of cool. You're telling them, okay, now you have to let it go.
Yeah.
Go out into the world and speak to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So do you have any questions or more? Other? I know many of you are artists, or all of you might be. Yeah. Okay. Oh, good. Actually, that's one I wanted to take out.
Which one?
The Julie Chen.
Oh,
This one is a Julie Chen piece called Bonbon Mold, and bon mot is it's a term used. It means good words and aphorisms. Yeah, good. Thank you. But bonbon, obviously, it's in the style of a box of chocolates, and these are beautifully rendered individual books. There's a guide like you would have in a chocolate box. This one says either or, social graces, elegy, life cycle, and labyrinth. And so the one that's out in the case is the social graces book, and it opens up not only as individual pages, but each page is a flower that opens up, and it's a double-sided folded piece. It's stunning. The top feels like it's made of resin, and on the inside it says, avoiding the backward glance, learning to lose without a struggle, letting bygones be bygones. So actually, these are keeping a positive attitude, always looking your best, smiling in the face of adversity, forgiving and forgetting, putting your best foot forward, and never speaking out of turn.
It's very gendered.
Isn't it? Yeah, and it's got that feel, that kind of precious, again, the color is also communicating something, the way that this is kind of soft. And do you want to take a look at that? Can you buy that? I don't, that's several years old. She may still have some, I can find out. Yeah. Do you need one of those?
You know, if you wouldn't mind taking out Shane's, I would give you the Moon and Stars.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I put my keys somewhere.
Shane moved into some bookmaking from making wall-hung cabinets that with etched brass or copper doors and constructions inside. And when I first saw her work of these boxes, I thought, this is a slice of a story, and I want to know what happened before and after. I mean, the slice is satisfying, but you can just tell there's another beginning and end. And so another friend and I talked her into starting to make some books. And this one you get to see the whole story, and it's just lovely. And she incorporated the metalwork that she does in her wall hanging.
Just to describe it, this is a book by Shane Miller, and this is a brass cover that's been etched, cut and etched, and then all the pages inside are printed on. So you said that she started off by making, she does little constructions,
They're wall-hung
sculptural.
boxes that open, and one of my favorite ones is the Budgerigar Society meeting. And you open it up, and it's these people etched in brass of very serious-looking people, and there's an etched list of the meetings they're having and how to feed your budgie and budgie diseases at 9:30, and she's really, really creative.
Mm-hmm.
On the left, there's a piece of cuttlebone in this beautiful rack. So most of her work incorporates some kind of etched metal, whether it's jewelry or a wall-hung box or the books. They're just beautiful. She's got a couple of pieces in the Bainbridge Arts Gallery, Crafts Gallery right now that are robots.
Yeah.
ROWBOTS. And she had to make them with knees so they could get in and out of the boat. Many robots don't have knees, according to her.
Funny.
So, very creative.
Well, and I do want to call attention, I'm not going to take it out of the case, but the Diane Jacobs hat that's in there, I don't know how many of you have spent time reading that one.
Yeah.
It's a part of, this is one piece. There are other pieces that are similar that are letterpress printed strips of paper that are configured into different shapes. The other one that she has that's been on display here is a sheitel, which is an Orthodox Jewish woman's wig. This one is like a fancy hat, and if you look closely, the words on it are epithets describing women, and the wig is constructed of epithets describing derogatory terms toward Jews. And so the way I've heard Cynthia describe it is that it's a form of protection, using those words in some kind of a garment that is sheltering you from that. And that's actually what I was reminded of when you were talking, that at one point I was remarking to Cynthia that I saw some themes in her collection, and one of the themes is this very strong, this kind of almost deceptive, soft presentation of a comment or a statement or a theme that's very strong and challenging. I mean, other themes that she, I think, is attracted to include craftsmanship, craftspersonship, and that you see that in, not just in this book collection or in this kind of craft collection, but in the kinds of work that she's drawn to, that it's very labor intensive or very cared for with the hand. And this idea of literary, being a literate person, both comes out in the artist books and in the work that she collects. Otherwise, there's a very strong thread of kind of intelligent work. It's not just something that's cast off or, I've seen a lot of work that's kind of, that's quickly made, and I don't see a lot of that in what she's drawn to. And then themes of environmental justice, social justice. So I think I think it's fun to look for those big, repeated patterns or themes that are larger. It's your chance. One more piece out of the case. Let's see what time we're at. Yeah, we have time for another one.
You beat a kid in a candy store.
Yeah, I know. Just not something so high that I have to get up on a stool to get it out.
Maybe that one in the corner, the one that looks stitched.
Okay. Oh, this one's a little complicated, actually. Yeah, I think I might not take that one out. It's on a...
That's all right. Whatever one you think is most easily
Peggy?
shared.
Is it, am I putting you on the spot to bring yours out?
No.
Would you be willing to? This actually is a great one to bring out if you're willing.
Sure. I think it's pretty easy to.
Okay.
I'll just fold it up.
Oh, this is gorgeous.
And box.
Well, so yeah, this is a piece that Peggy's made, and this is the box that it is contained in, and out of the wooden box would come this
Right.
piece.
And this thing would be wrapped in fabric too.
What is that called in Japan when they do that, when they fold it?
I don't know the name.
Hiroshiki?
Furoshiki.
That kind of with the triangular, yeah.
It's the wrapping.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll scooch over.
So I try to suggest something about what's inside on the outside to kind of give a clue. This- And the idea behind this is being caught with all our stuff, looking at ourselves, looking at our stuff, and then all of this kind of wonderful stuff is happening outside and missing.
So I just want to call attention to the similarities between these two, and the differences, and how really you're not given any information about what's inside this one. Peggy has had work on display for the past several months with the Thought Patterns exhibit, and we've had gallery hosts up in the upstairs who, with gloves, have shown different groups how these things operate. And what I've really enjoyed is that they're approachable for a second grade clientele. They feel very, the scale, I think, the miniaturization is something that is really understandable. They feel like they have permission to talk about it, but the layers of meaning that you've put in there are so many and deep that it's also great for an adult audience.
That's good.
And I also really have marveled at how you've constructed these things so precisely that all of the sculptural pieces fit in the box without being compressed. I mean, this one may be not as obvious as some of the other ones that had especially the ones with the figures and that fit inside the box. So that the kind of planful engineering that goes in, and just an
Peggy,
awe.
what's the title of this one?
Against the wall.
Against the Wall.
There's little mirrors back here, if you can't see,
Yeah.
that just make this stuff go on forever.
How long does it take you to make one of these?
3 or 4 months.
And what is the grass made out of?
It's embroidery thread.
Whoa.
Oh my
Whoa.
Have you treated it with something like a
Yeah.
stiffening?
Yeah, I use methylcellulose,
Huh.
which is a paper stiffener.
Uh-huh.
But you can paint it on fabric
Huh.
and then get the fabric in the position you want and it dries.
Oh.
And it stays there and
Huh.
it doesn't coat it with,
It's not shiny.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you can't really tell it's there. So
Is it
even
an addition of just one? then?
yeah. Once is enough.
Yeah, really.
And then it's time to move on.
You know, I have to say about the ones that were in the gallery, to me, they were just profoundly magic because
Yeah.
they held so much information just in the visual. But I watched so many people come and glance and go on, and it would just break my heart. So when the video
Yeah.
was here, that interspersed someone opening it with just a word, and usually provocative words that drew you in and made you think. I always, when I was up here, giving somebody a break or something like that, I would always say, don't miss the video, because
Yeah,
it makes people really look at it from a totally different perspective. They're just wonderful.
At one time someone told me that, well, it's not fair to draw people in and then have an idea that's going to,
Yeah.
upset them.
Yeah.
But I figure the idea of working miniature like that gives you the opportunity, as we were saying about this, the opportunity to say things that are maybe divisive or upsetting.
I've seen this
Well,
before.
and fair is a very personal term as well.
And what?
Fair is a very negotiable
yeah.
term.
Right.
All fair in love and art.
Yeah.
You've
There's-
seen that T-shirt that says, "Good art doesn't have to match your couch." That's what art's about, is to put ideas
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah.
There's actually a great book by the French philosopher Gaston Bachelard called The Poetics of Space. And there's a chapter, well, you want to
Yeah,
read
about
the chapter
miniatures,
on
yeah.
miniature and
Yeah.
how he's talking about how the world of the miniature is expansive in that it allows us into an expansive way of thinking. And so that miniature has some extra power that we can't actually get with expansive
Yeah.
physical space.
Yeah.
Or yeah.
And I think women's work is that opportunity to say things in a very quiet, subtle way, but they can still be pretty powerful things.
So the trick, I think maybe the retort is that, I mean, the beauty is the thing that's the conveyor of this difficult topic, and it's
Yeah,
not just being, it may be more easier to
I think so.
access it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is Guillaume de Bachelard?
Gaston,
Gaston.
yeah, Bachelard.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks. We're
thank
lucky
you.
to have Peggy. Peggy will be
Yeah.
leading one of the open book tours later in the spring, so I'm sure that one will fill up.
How is it for you all as artists to see other people's works?
I'll open
and
the case for you.
so many different approaches to this
Oh,
concept.
sorry, it's
I
open.
mean, it must be very inspiring.
Thank you for
and
letting me put your
exciting for you.
It's just like meeting another person. I mean, it's a very, I think making books is very personal, and so you're putting yourself
Yeah,
out there.
that looks good.
Here I am. Here's what I have to say.
Mhm.
What do you think? You know, it's really, I think books encourage, they create opportunities for conversation.
Does it inspire you to want to approach a material or a theme from a different modality or a different way of different structure? Is there a lot of cross-pollination between artists if you see some other way of doing things?
I think that there is cross-pollination, but I think it just depends on where you are on your path. I mean, Peggy's definitely found her place that she wants to work, and So I think if you're looking for ideas, that, you know, this is a great place right here to look at the way different people do things. But then eventually you kind of settle into a path that you're on and explore that.
Also, I think, you know, if content comes from forum, all the forums you see are going to trigger, or it's like they're available for you to use for whatever content you might be interested in.
Yeah.
For me, it's mind-boggling where all these people are coming from. You know, I know what I make and I know what I'm doing, and I look at it and go, well, I didn't think of that. Wow, look at that. I didn't think of that. Who thought of that? I couldn't think of that.
Yeah.
And you know, it's just amazing to see all these different approaches. And you get to work in what you like as an artist, I think. You get to-
Sometimes I'm working on a project and or something doesn't feel quite right, and I just need to, there's a missing piece, and so sometimes just talking to or being with one of my book friends will give me the key to solve the problem. You know, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that. I'll try that.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, there seem to be some mega themes too, especially, well, I don't know, I started to say especially for women, but that's not necessarily true. But if you look around here, how many of these books deal with hands? That's just a mega, that's something
good point.
we all respond to, but they're all different. And some of the themes overlap. That bottle up there with the books in it is incredible. And I have a piece that's a bronze boat with 20 little bottles in it with little messages in it. And they're not the same, but they're kind of related in terms of messages you really can't read, but you know they're in there. You know, so you get to sort of make up your own. So just looking at the differences and the overlaps, cards. How can you not, as a bookmaker, want to make a deck of cards?
Yeah.
I haven't made one yet, but I want to.
Oh, yeah, you should
I
show
did.
that.
I did bring this, but it was
Your
not.
game piece it's sort of like a deck of cards.
Oh, yeah, it is. I like working with that book weight.
So I brought these, but not as a part of this. It's a exercise we used to do when I was teaching freshmen at Cornish. It's a Goodwill deck of cards, and each one has an image that's been cut and pasted onto the surface. And we use this, well, I was explaining to Carolina that I used to collect, I had this big image bank of cut out magazine photos that I kept for years. I mean, really like 30 years maybe. And I just had fetishized every one of those images. Like I'd look at the image, I would remember where I got it or remember what drew me to it. And so I forced myself to make the cards out of the photos so that I would release that. And I had to, so these photos were magazine page size, and I had to isolate the portion of the picture that I thought was most meaningful. So it was a really good exercise in kind of challenging myself to be a little bit more open. And it's also a good exercise in cutting and being precise. And yeah, so this is, and then it's a good thing to use for prompting, self-prompting. If you're trying to think of something to make and you just flip through the cards, it's a good reminder of, yeah.
Well, your statement of needing to get something out, some of my work is like that. Something will be in my head, and it may take me years to get it out, but it's not going to go away until I get it out, you know?
Yeah.
And it's just, yeah, the bad ideas I forget. The good ideas that I think are good, that they just stay until you make them. You know? You have that experience? Yeah.
Sometimes bad ideas take on a different life and become great.
That could happen too.
I wouldn't want to play poker with that deck.
I find that with poetry too, because I can have an idea and I'll write down just one word, and the whole poem, without ever having been written, can be encapsulated, the feeling of what I was trying to express, to be developed someday when I've got,
Right.
you know, the time or all the words fall out of my mouth and I can put that
Right.
together.
Yeah.
Or are there any bad ideas? I don't know.
Oh, I've had some.
I like that you mentioned about a way, that this is a way of focusing. because I think sometimes with ideas can be just overwhelming.
Mhm.
And then being able to narrow down and select out just what you need
Mhm.
to say what, more precisely what you want to say.
Mhm.
There are 2 decks of cards for sale in many of them, but the artist made a bunch.
Mhm.
But they're hand-drawn deck of cards,
For
hand
Seattle.
illustrated.
Of
Of
vignettes
Seattle,
yeah.
yeah, they're
Fabulous.
beautiful.
Fabulous.
I'd want to play cards with those,
Mhm.
but you stop and, you couldn't stop looking at them and really play. They're beautiful drawings.
Well, and that's another format that's been used over and over. Like Ray and Charles Eames made they had a deck of cards called the House of Cards that were slotted. You could build with them, but they also had these fabulous photos of collections that they had of similar things,
Yeah.
like marbles and dolls, and so the deck of cards is another one of those formats that comes up.
Uh-huh.
So I think we're just about at 12 o'clock if anybody has any last words, but I've really enjoyed having you here. Thanks, Carolina.
Think so?
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is always
and
such a
come-
pleasure and
Yes, it
such a
is.
privilege. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.